Please take a picture. Please focus on the picture. To get her face out there so that
working on 3 hours sleep and a couple of crackers, he protects his fondest hopes, battles his worst fears, and sometimes loses.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to have her holler at me right now.
I'd give anything, he says, to have her holler at me right now. It's a rare lapse. Mostly, there is a desperate monotony to his mission.
I know she made a 911 call at 9:02:07.
It's all that David Vincent knows about what happened to his eldest daughter. It's enough to hang hope on.
When we went back to the cell phone provider, the only thing that we had that they could tell us is that there was a 911 call made from that cell phone at 9:02, which was some 17 minutes after the jet had piled into the thing.
9:02:07. He tells it to everyone he talks to. He clings to it for dear life, because of course it is.
I need to know where she was when she made that call, because that will tell me whether she was downstairs just getting off the path and maybe in a void someplace downstairs, or whether I have to understand that she was upstairs on 102 and have to wonder whether she was able to get out or not able to get out.
By evening, David Vincent has pretty much worn out the corner of 26th and Lexington, and his cell battery is fading, so he moves on. Craig Spitzer is CEO of Alliance. 7 employees, everyone thought to be in the building that morning, are missing. He cannot, will not, bring himself to believe they're gone.
I'm not going to say that to you right now.
You can't?
No, and I won't. And I won't for myself, and I won't for the people in there.
In there is a room full of people who have loved someone too long to give up so soon, and what's left after hope is unthinkable. It is why they agreed to expose this rawest of human times to the glare of the camera lens, because maybe somebody out there has information about Roland, something that will keep his brother moving.
I go to sleep with hope, I wake up with none.
And perhaps somebody saw Eric in a stairwell racing to safety.
We don't know, maybe he's out there someplace, got hit on the head and he doesn't know who he is. You know, maybe he's unconscious and he didn't have any identification on him.
And as it turns out, nobody can say for sure that Melissa was in the office for that 8:30 meeting.
I have to tell you, Craig, that's the best news that I could possibly hear, because what you're telling me is you can't confirm Melissa in that office space, and that's what I had to know. Yeah. That's what keeps me going.
So if you know anything about Melissa, call her father. He'd give anything to hear her holler at him again. Candy Crowley, CNN, New York.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York City today. You're looking at a shot that has become all too familiar. The New York skyline obscured by that smoke and steam that continues to come out of what is known as Ground Zero. As you can see, thousands of rescue workers still working around the clock, racing against time. The mayor of the city says they will continue to view this as a rescue operation until all hope is gone. The numbers, though, even the mayor concedes, are not promising. The number of missing has gone up since yesterday. Now believed 5,000 people are believed to be missing. There is an attempt to get some sense of normal life back here. New York's 3 area airports are open today. They're running far fewer flights than normal. A spokesman for the Port Authority says Newark International, which is one of the airports from which a plane was hijacked last week, is expected to handle about 700 flights today. That's 75% of the airport's normal volume. Kennedy and LaGuardia are scheduled to run about half the flights they normally schedule, and right now the mayor will give us even more updated information. Let's dip in on his news.
At least get a few of these things out. First of all, during the course of today and then starting tomorrow, and then over 2 or 3 days, we're going to be transitioning the main work of the Family Center to the pier right above us, which is right off 57th Street. And later on, when it's ready, and it's just about ready, they'll arrange for you to tour it and take a look at it so that you can see the incredible work that's been done to make it into a family center that can accommodate the numbers that we're dealing with, which are now considerably larger than the Armory can handle. The Armory will remain open. We'll be running shuttle buses from it because people have gotten used to it. And then at some point when the transition is made, the Armory will go back to its normal use or whatever other use we're going to have for it. And then the Family Center here will take over all operations. But the transition will start tomorrow, and it will take as long as it takes to transition everything to the Family Center that'll be here. And the Armory will stay open for as long as people are still going there. I went to see the Family Center last night. First time I looked at it was the day before, and in 24 hours, they have turned it into a state-of-the-art facility. And the only way that happened, really, is because of tremendous volunteer work. The Bovis Corporation oversaw the reconstruction, but we had tremendous help from Accenture, from AOL Time Warner, and from lots of other people. And the other advantage of the Family Center is that we're utilizing about half the space there. So if, in fact, the numbers are even larger than we anticipate, we can expand by twice as much and have in one place all of the facilities that we're going to need to deal with the number of people who are going to be registered or involved in looking for their loved ones and trying to get information about them. The numbers now are 180 confirmed dead, 115 of whom have been identified, and 65 unidentified. And the number of missing is 5,097 that we have now registered as a missing person. The reports that were on the news late last night and this morning of knocking at the site, regrettably, are not true. There were no such reports. The recovery effort continues, and the hope is still there that we might be able to save some lives. But the reality is that in the last several days we haven't found anyone. And the reports of there being activity of some kind, although there have been several of those, I imagine because there's so much of a feeling and so much of a sense that we want that to be true, those reports are not true. But in any event, we're going to continue to search for people and look for people at the same time realizing that the losses here are staggering. There'll be a prayer service next week on September 23rd at 3 p.m. and the locations and all of the details of it will be put out later. But that's the period of time. And I've asked Governor Pataki and I have asked the religious leaders of our city, who I met with on Thursday, the religious leaders of our city, and I asked Mayors Koch and Dinkins to be part of a group to help make recommendations as to the best way to do that prayer service. So it'll be September 23rd at 3 p.m. And as the days go by, we'll fill in all of the details, but it'll be an appropriate occasion for everyone to come together and pray in a large and unified way. Today is also Sunday, which I was very thankful for when I woke up this morning. It's wonderful to get to Sunday and have a beautiful Sunday. And it is an appropriate day for people to reflect on what happened last week. And people are doing it in churches all over the city. There'll be a Mass at St. Patrick's this evening at 5 o'clock. But life goes on, and the life of the city is going on. And the prediction that I made on the first day is proving to be true. The city is stronger than it was last week at this time. We've had the most horrible attack in the history of the city, and we have emerged a stronger city, more united with ourselves, more united with the rest of America, with tremendous support and assistance. We're getting tremendous support and assistance from the state, from the federal government, and from people all over the world, and we're giving them tremendous support and assistance by the spirit that we have, the way in which we rebuilt the emergency center virtually in 3 days, and it's bigger and more effective than probably ever before, with the attitude and direction of the fire commissioner and the fire department, and having to sustain the worst losses ever, but at the same time, in a short while, promoting people who will step into the shoes of people who are missing and have the fire department emerge from that even stronger. I'm going to a wedding today, which means a great deal to me, because it's a wedding of the sister of firefighter Garumba, who died 3 weeks ago in the line of duty, Diane Garumba, and police officer Michael Ferrito. In the course of the last year, Diane lost her grandfather, her father, and her brother, and therefore had no one to walk her down the aisle. And Mrs. Garumba asked me to do that several weeks ago at the wake. So at 3 o'clock this afternoon, I'm going to take time out to go to a wedding. And I have thought very often in the last couple of days about Mrs. Garumba's advice at her son's wake when I found out that she had lost her father, her husband, and her son in the course of 12 months. I asked her how she can bear it, and she said because she feels the pain of it, she allows the pain to happen, but then she focuses on the good things that are left in life, like her daughter's wedding. And that's what you have to do, she said. You have to focus on the good things in life, and you have to go and participate in the good things. And one of the good things is her daughter's wedding. So I've thought about that quite a bit this week. And then at 5 o'clock this afternoon, there's a Mass at St. Patrick's. So the life of the city goes on, and I encourage people to go about their lives. One of the best things they can do to show how strong we are and how terrorists can't cower us is not to be coward. Go ahead and go about the everyday activities. Go to church if you go to church on Sunday. If you go to a park and play with your children, do that. If you like to go out and spend money, I would encourage that. It's always a good thing. And I encourage people from all over the country who want to help. I have a great way of helping. Come here and spend money. Go to a restaurant, a play. You might actually have a better chance of getting tickets to the producers now if you want to come here and see it. But the life of the city goes on, and I think this Sunday symbolizes that.
Stand by.
Wow, you've just heard the mayor of New York City delivering what is, by all definitions, an emotional message to New Yorkers and the rest of the world, saying that life goes on, and one of the best ways to prove that is for all of us to go back to our normal lives and not be cowed by what happened to us last week. He proclaimed that the city is stronger today than it was a week ago at this time, and that because of this strength, that New Yorkers are united with each other in a way they never had been before, and perhaps New Yorkers are united with Americans all over the country in a way they were never united before. The mayor updating some statistics for us today, confirming there are more than 5,000 people missing, 1,880 people confirmed dead, 115 of those have been identified. The mayor also shot down reports of any possible contact made between victims trapped in the rubble and emergency rescue workers. He said he wishes those were true. They are not, but made it very clear that this is still being called a rescue operation, and they will continue to work that way until all hope has faded. He told Bill, I'm sure you heard this poignant story about walking a young woman down the aisle today who lost her grandfather, father, and brother in a period of several weeks. He was asked by this young woman's mother if he would accompany her down the aisle today, and sort of said that this is a sign that of joy and that we should all allow ourselves to concentrate perhaps on what is good in our life.
Yeah.
Bill?
Also echoing the words of Frank DeFord, who just spoke 15 minutes ago on CNN about trying to encourage people to go back to their lives as normal or as close to normal as they can. The mayor even suggesting people should go out and spend money if indeed that is what makes them happy. You know, while we were listening to the mayor, Paula, a number of people down here, officials, are passing out these paper gas masks here to a number of members of the media. There's probably about 100 of us gathered here. In addition to that, as I look around up the street here on Greenwich Street, I see several hundred civilians too. They're getting them as well. The word we get from the state police here is that a generator may be blown sometime very soon, just about 2 blocks from here inside the former World Trade Center. If that generator blows, they say indeed some toxic fumes may be released into the air. Again, that's the word we're getting from the state police here. The other thing I want to point out as we watch that is if our viewers see that steam and smoke still rising from the debris here, a lot of that smoke, there's some small fires that still pop up from time to time. They have to contend with those, but the steam you see, we are being told that that steel that burned on Tuesday exceeded 1,000 degrees at some points. And again, when the water goes on those at this point, they have a lot of trapped heat, and that steam comes up from the rubble here. We saw several hundred firefighters also march in about 20 minutes ago, Paula. It's possible they may go to attend this situation here with the generator, but we'll watch that. But again, we're told at this time to put these on, and we will follow their orders. Paula, back to you.
Well, you better put that on right now, Bill, and if you have to do your next report with it on, we will understand. Right now, we're going to check in with William Gavin, who is at one time was the deputy director of the FBI. He has been involved in a number of terrorist investigations, and he's going to lend us some of his skill here this morning. Welcome. Good to have you with us, sir.
Good morning.
What did you learn from the World Trade Center bombing in '93 that might assist investigators in their investigation today?
I think that the one thing that we learned was that you must pay close attention in the investigative phase of this case. You have to pay close attention to every single detail, every piece of evidence, every statement that's made, everything that somebody might have heard, every suspicion they might have had. All of these things are woven together to help us solve this case, and that's probably one of the primary things. The other thing is the resiliency of the people of not only of New York City, but of the people of the United States. We will go on, but we will resolve this matter.
I think your thoughts are seconded by many folks across America. Let's get back to the investigation for a moment. Based on what you're hearing that the FBI has confirmed, do you believe, as President Bush told us yesterday, that indeed Osama bin Laden is the prime suspect?
Well, I think there's no doubt about that. That's something that I've believed since 9/11, that he was, in fact, the prime subject in this horrific act that was committed against the humanity, not just the American people, but against humanity. I don't think there's any doubt. The sights, the sounds, the smells, his ability to weave together this intricate web of treachery all points to Osama bin Laden.
And you were talking about the need to pay such close attention to every single detail, to every single statement that has been made. When you think back to your first World Trade Center investigation, how were you able to trace the men you did and their followers to the bombing?
Well, it started out in terms of that piece of metal that had the serial number stamped in it from the Ryder rental truck. That piece of metal that was found. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Gavin. I know there have been a number of interruptions. I'm really sorry to interrupt your flow of thought. Okay. You carry on with how your investigation led you to Mr. Youssef.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. The problem was there when we first found the identification number stamped in the rail of the Ryder truck, tracing it from the manufacturer to the first buyer to the renter, all the way back to Jersey City to Mohammed Salameh, who had rented that truck. That triggered a huge investigative effort determining who Mohammed Salameh was, and quite frankly, he was very helpful in this case because he showed up in Jersey City to pick up a deposit for that truck that he had reported stolen, knowing full well that he had filled it full of explosives and tried to blow up the World Trade Center.
I wanted you to provide some perspective on a debate that's raging now and then will continue to rage in the days to come, and that is the debate about how much leverage the United States really has if they can prove that Osama bin Laden did this to in any way target him. Senator Schumer was a guest earlier this morning, and he said he believes that some of the restrictions that law enforcement agencies had to operate with might be relaxed. Is that what it will take to stop this man, if in fact he is the prime suspect?
Well, there's a couple of things here. I believe, number one, the country must go on to do what they have to do in order to catch him. But in order to stop him, in order to stop future terrorist acts by whomever that may want to accomplish them, we do have to take those handcuffs off just a bit in order to help us get what needs to be done. I say us meaning law enforcement. I keep reverting back to the past. But in order to get what we need done, we have to take those handcuffs off and give law enforcement and intelligence agencies a bit more flexibility in getting the job done.
Gavin, thank you again for your participation today. I apologize for the number of interruptions, but as you well know, we are constantly being given new information, and we want to get it on the air as soon as possible. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
All right, now we're going to go back to the Washington Bureau again, where Bob Novak is joining us with Novak, Hunt, and Shields, and the rest of the team. Good morning, Bob. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Paula. I'm Robert Novak. Al Hunt and I will question one of the Defense Secretary's top advisors.
He is the chairman of the U.S. Defense Policy Board, Richard Perle. Mr. Perle, thank you for being with us. Secretary of State Colin Powell has said that we are going to assemble the widest possible coalition, including many Arab states, in this war against terrorism. Is that doable and a good idea?
Yes, I think it's doable. Let me say at the outset that I'm speaking only for myself. The Policy Board has not met on this subject, so anything you hear from me today is my own view. The key thing is to assemble the widest effective coalition. And sometimes there is a difference between breadth and depth. What we want in a coalition are those countries that are truly beside us in combating international terrorism. And to try to bring in those who are in fact part of the problem rather than the solution in order to widen it, I think would be a great mistake. We need people who are solid and reliable.
So who should we not bring in? Should we not bring in Iran? Should we not bring in Pakistan? Tell me who we should not bring in.
It would be crazy to bring in Iran, which is involved in terrorism, or Iraq, which is involved in terrorism. And frankly, I think it's unwise to attempt to bring in Yasser Arafat, who has not only a history as a terrorist, but has been letting go the very sorts of suicide bombers and others that are behind these international acts of terror.
You mentioned Iraq. Vice President Cheney said on Meet the Press that our information is Iraq was not behind this latest incident. But should a primary goal of the war on terrorism be to topple Saddam Hussein?
Yes, I think so. There's no question Saddam has been involved in acts of terror. He gives support to terrorists and harbors them. They have safe passage in his country. They're permitted to operate there freely. As long as he is around with his desire for vengeance, he will be supporting international terrorism. And we need to take this fight to the countries that harbor terrorists. Chasing individual terrorists is not the way to solve this problem.
So Mr. Perle, you're proposing that we go after...
All right, hate to have to do this to you, gentlemen, but I got to break into your show to bring you some statements by Attorney General John Ashcroft, who now joins us from Camp David. I'm actually looking at this shot, and I don't think he has appeared at that table yet, but I'm told he has walked into the room and will be making a statement shortly. There's the microphone he will be addressing. A little hubbub of activity preceding the Attorney General's arrival. Let's listen.
It's a resonant podium. During this past week, we've been dealing with the impact of an assault on the United States and civilized people of the world that has come from a pervasive and substantial terrorist network. It's a matter of the compound nature of the tragedy to understand that nations from Argentina to Zimbabwe, from A to Z, have lost hundreds of citizens in this tragedy. It illustrates for us that terrorism is the enemy of human civilization. Our effort is to develop all the information we can about terrorism, the terrorists and the terrorist networks that have inflicted this injury on the United States and this assault upon the people of the world, and to do everything we can to disrupt them and to put an end to their capacity. They have declared war on the United States with an act of war, and the President has very carefully noted that we consider it a responsibility to do everything within our power to those interests that threaten the United States and its interests to end their capacity to do so. Obviously, among the organizations that have that capacity and have previously been involved in assaults against the United States and its interests is the network of Osama bin Laden and his network. It is important to note that in recent months and years, a variety of terrorist organizations have cooperated in networking together, and that terrorism is an enemy to civilized people. We will be doing everything we can. We have launched the largest single investigation in the history of the United States. We have 4,000 active FBI agents pursuing a wide variety of tips and understandings and questions. We'll get to the bottom of this circumstance, but we'll also develop an understanding of how we can prevent further episodes, assaults on America and our people. It's clear to me that we need to upgrade and strengthen a number of laws in the United States. The Congress has very appropriately expressed its thorough willingness to provide for the President the resources that are appropriate in terms of finances to conduct this effort, and I believe they will cooperate to provide the enhanced law enforcement resources by way of authority. Let me indicate a few of the matters that I believe will be in a package that we will carry to the Hill, and ask members of the Congress to assist us in this effort by enacting authorizing legislation. I might add that I expect to be involved with members of the Congress on the Hill this afternoon in discussing these issues. In terms of upgrading and strengthening our capacity, let me say that we need to make sure that we have assigned a high priority to the fight against terrorism. There are areas of our laws and procedures which give us better tools against organized crime, against illegal gambling, for example, than we have against terrorists. We need to make sure that we provide the maximum capacity against terrorists in the United States. We need, for instance, to make it, to elevate the penalties for those who would harbor or assist terrorists to at least the same level as the penalties for those who would harbor or assist those who have been involved in espionage. And there are areas in which we need to just expand our capacity to surveil those involved in terrorist activities. Telephone surveillance has been limited historically to specific telephones rather than to people, so that if the telephone number changes out of its home area, or if a person ceases using one telephone and begins to use another telephone, we have to go back to court to get new authority. Now, most Americans, we all understand that you can buy disposable telephones now, use them for a limited period of time, and throw them away. And it simply doesn't make sense to have the surveillance authority associated with the hardware or with the phone instead of with the person or the terrorist. And we're going to ask Congress to help us with items like that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to go to the members of Congress, many of whom have called me and spoken to me during this last week and indicated that they are eager to provide a basis for us to address the new challenges which we indeed are facing as a result of this turning point in the history of the United States. And we will develop the tools, strengthen our capacity, and persist in our investigation and effort to disrupt and to make and reduce the risk of reoccurrence in matters like this. I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today and for the reporting you do on this issue. Thank you.
All right, some strong words coming from the Attorney General this morning, calling terrorism the enemy of human civilization, saying that the United States will do everything in its power to disrupt these networks that he says are pervasive and substantial. He also went on to say that he would like to elevate the penalties for anybody accused of either harboring someone involved in a terrorist attack or the attackee itself to the level of espionage. Let's quickly go back to Bob Novak, who I'm sure would love to get back into the substance of his show. Sorry about the interruption, Bob. It was important to go to the Attorney General.
Thank you, Paula. We're talking to Richard Perle, former Assistant Secretary of Defense. He is now a private citizen, but he is also chairman of the Defense Policy Board of the Pentagon, and so is a leading advisor to Secretary Rumsfeld, but he is speaking for himself in our conversation. Mr. Perle, maybe you can help. You can clear up some confusion. We've been talking about war, that this is a war. We're talking about a military mobilization, and the Attorney General Ashcroft was talking about what seemed to be a criminal proceeding against individual terrorists. Is there a confusion there?
No, I think there are two tracks here. There's an effort to determine who individually was responsible for this act of terror and to try to discern the ties back to larger terrorist organizations. But separate and apart from that, if we are going to win the war against terrorism, we must take that war to the countries who harbor terrorists, who give them the facilities, the money, the training, the intelligence, the communications. Without that, the ability of these terrorists, bin Laden or anyone else, to inflict this kind of damage would be extremely limited.
Mr. Perle, before we went to Attorney General Ashcroft, I understood you to be saying that we should take actions against terrorists or people who harbor terrorists, even if they are not necessarily associated with the catastrophe of September 11th. Is that correct?
Even if we cannot prove to the standards that we enjoy in our own civil society that they were involved. We do know, for example, that Saddam Hussein has ties to Osama bin Laden. That can be documented. So on the theory, which seems to me a valid one, that if you support terrorists and they then commit atrocities against Americans, you are responsible. Unless we hold those countries responsible, we will be chasing terrorists without significant effect.
If we go into, if the United States goes into Afghanistan, could you say perhaps that the United States has learned something from the Soviet catastrophe in Afghanistan, and that an expeditionary force is not the answer, that perhaps there has to be commando strikes, Delta Force teams, rather than putting in a big set-piece battle operation such as the United States had in Iraq?
Well, I have no knowledge of what may be underway in terms of planning, but I can't imagine that we would send a significant ground force into Afghanistan. We have a lot of other options. There's a civil war going on in Afghanistan. There is another side, not now in power, that deserves the support of the United States, and that may be a much better approach. There's something similar going on in Iraq, where there's an opposition to Saddam Hussein. They ought to have our support. We should be aligning ourselves with the opponents of terrorism where we can find them. And we should be taking this war to the heart of the enemy, which is the infrastructure that supports them. Without that infrastructure, there may be a car bomb, there may be a hijacking, but we won't see anything on the scale of the tragedy we've seen now.
Mr. Pearl, supporting the other side in Afghanistan or in Iraq may make for good long-run policy, but that's probably not going to do anything in the very, very short run. So I want to rephrase Bob's question. In the short run, if we determine that someone like Osama bin Laden is the culprit here, should we send in some kind of commando force to get him if need be?
Well, I don't know that we know where he is. We mustn't reduce the war on terror to a manhunt against Osama bin Laden. Despicable as he is, he's not the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is a network of countries and terrorist organizations working together, hand in glove, supporting one another. And that provides the infrastructure that permits terror on this scale to take place. If the terrorists had to change location every night, if they couldn't walk into an office where they have communications and secretaries and research and the support of governments, their ability to do what has been done would be greatly reduced. So that's where we have to concentrate our efforts.
Can you do that without at least some commitment of American ground forces, wherever it be? For instance, the Weekly Standard this week raised the possibility of an actual war in the Middle East with United States ground troops there.
Well, we want to choose targets that are going to protect us, whose elimination would diminish the exposure of the United States to terrorist attacks. And I can't tell you that we have such a target in our sights today. I don't know. I have no inside information on this. But we want to choose targets very carefully. And when we have chosen them, we want to be devastatingly effective. We have the capacity to make the cost of supporting terrorism extremely high.
Do we have the intelligence capacity? Are you convinced that this was a breakdown of our intelligence capacity? And if you are, why should we have confidence in it in the future?
I think we have a lot of useful intelligence in terms of which countries support terrorist organizations. That's different from the kind of intelligence that permits you to foil a specific plot. There, I'm afraid, we're weak. But we do know which countries have been helping these terrorists. And they can't hide. They can't run. They have military installations, they have intelligence organizations, they have leadership facilities, and our ability to make the price very high for continued support of terrorism is substantial. And that could include, and in my view should include, the use of military force against the key installations of countries that support terrorism. And these countries, by and large, are dictatorships that depend for their own leadership on the ability to intimidate their own people. So if we strike at their intelligence organizations, at their military forces, we can be effective.
Mr. Pearl, you talked about the power of the United States military around the world, but as an advisor to the Pentagon, I'm sure you've been involved in what has been an effort in the Bush administration to revive the military from its weakened position over the last several years. Are you talking about a future strength, or do you believe that the United States military is capable of a major worldwide operation against these various targets?
I think we are very strong. We could be stronger. We need to make changes because our forces, even today, are a legacy in many ways of the Cold War, oriented toward Cold War missions, and we need to reorient them toward missions like this one, dealing with terrorism. But there's tremendous strength. We have the ability, for example, where we can identify targets, to destroy them from the air with very high probability of success.
I want to go back to Mr. Hunt's first question about the coalition building. You've been watching Moscow for about 30 years closely, I believe. And just over the weekend, we've had some statements by Ivanov, the defense minister, kind of backing away from support. And we've had support from Nikolai Patrushev, the head of what's the equivalent of the KGB, saying that he warned the United States about this, and we didn't take, the United States didn't take the advice. based on that kind of comment coming from the Kremlin, how much help in this fight against terrorism do you expect to come from Moscow?
I don't think we'll get a lot of help from Moscow. I think the help will come from those Western democracies who share our values, who believe in the value of human life and individual liberty, who are part of our culture, our history, our tradition. The countries on the margins that we can drag into this kicking and screaming, who really don't want to be part of it, but we can intimidate, are not the kind of reliable allies that we need for this war.
Don't you have some concern, sir, about the United States, Israel, and Western Europe aligned against maybe 3 billion people around the world, Islam, China, Russia? The odds don't look very good there.
Well, I don't think we're against Russia or against China. And with respect to Islam, we're not against Islam. This country helped to save Bosnia. I wish we'd done more to save Bosnia and had done it earlier. What we are against are people who destroy innocent civilians in the name of some fanatical vision of what the world should be like. And for them, there is no room. For America, there is no room for Western civilization and Western culture. They are the enemy, and it is in dealing with them that we must focus our efforts.
Is Iran one of the targets of our war on terrorism?
Iran has been supporting terrorism. There is no doubt about it.
And the Saudis always say nice things, but is the past any guide to what kind of real cooperation they'll provide or not provide?
Well, I think the Saudis, unfortunately, have often looked the other way in order to try to diminish the terrorist threat to themselves. So I would not expect the Saudis to be the most reliable of our allies. The reliable allies are going to be those whose heart is in it, whose soul is in it. And that's the coalition we need to build.
The big question for Richard Perle, and this Sunday morning, sir, there's a lot of talk in Washington that Reagan National Airport will never be reopened. If the United States cannot provide security for the close-in airport of its national capital, isn't that a great victory for terrorism?
It would be indeed. I can't believe that Reagan would remain closed. In any case, we mustn't fight the last war over again. The next attack will not be of the same nature as this one. It will be entirely different. If we close airports because of what happened a few days ago, we'll discover that that isn't effective because something else another route will be chosen.
What is the most dangerous route to think about now?
Well, I think we have to worry about the use of biological and chemical weapons against water supplies.
That's all the time we have of Richard Perle. Thank you very much for joining us. From Washington, I'm Robert Novak.
And I'm Al Hunt. Now more of CNN's coverage of America's new war.
Thanks so much, gentlemen. Just a quick note before we move on here. As we take a look of the debris field, we have a lot of correspondents very close into ground zero. I wanted to share with you a fact that really is quite staggering. We have learned that 11.8 metric tons of gold worth an estimated $110 million and 30.2 million ounces of silver valued at $121 million is buried in the rubble below one of the collapsed buildings of the World Trade Center. And this belongs to people or firms that trade future contracts on the New York Mercantile Exchange. The market's, of course, opening tomorrow. The mayor reiterating he very much wants New Yorkers to get back to their normal lives. The mayor confirming that 80 people are dead, 115 of those identified, 5,097 registered as missing. He once again proclaimed that the city has emerged much stronger than it was just a week ago, and he very much wants New Yorkers to do what they can to get south of that area, south of 14th Street, that has been very difficult to get into. He wants people to go back to work not far from the debris of the World Trade Center. Right now we head to London, where Christiane Amanpour is standing by to tell us a little bit about an interview she did earlier today with the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Hi, Christiane.
Paula, hi. As America has been mourning, so too there has been an enormous amount of support and shock and sympathy directed towards Americans from all around the world. And at the same time, we here at CNN have been speaking to the world leaders who would be part of a coalition that the United States is trying to forge right now. We've spoken variously to the president of France, to the leader of NATO, to the president of Turkey, to the president of Egypt, and also today we talked to the Prime Minister of Britain, who again, in the most forceful language that he's used yet, has said that Britain will be together with the United States and that he was confident that the alliance would remain cohesive. Prime Minister Tony Blair was one of the first of the U.S. allies to come out and say categorically that the United Kingdom stands shoulder to shoulder with the United States. He also said that Britain's interests are intimately engaged because of the high number of British casualties. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us this morning. Yesterday, the President of the United States said, "We are at war. War has been declared on us." Are you prepared to say that war has been declared and that there is a state of war?
Yes, whatever the technical or legal issues about a declaration of war, the fact is we are at war with terrorism. What happened on Tuesday was an attack not just upon the United States, but upon the civilized world. The thousands of people that lost their lives included nationals of many, many countries. Probably 200-300 people from Britain will have died in that terrorist attack. That makes it, in fact, the worst terrorist attack on British citizens that there has been since the Second World War. So this is a situation that concerns us all. Our own interests are intimately engaged, quite apart from the fact that in these times it's important that America realizes that her friends right around the world stand with her.
You and other leaders have talked about a global alliance to combat this global network of terror, and there are obviously many components, including a military component. What will the United Kingdom, what will Britain do if the United States decides to go to war?
This is something, obviously, we are discussing with the American president, the American administration at the moment, what help we can give. And I'm very pleased at the way that America and the American administration has gone out of its way to consult its allies, to keep us fully informed so that we are part of the deliberations they're making. But we have to do two things, in my view. First of all, there has to be a response to bring those terrorists who committed this attack to account, and we will play our full part in that. And secondly, there has then to be an agenda that we construct at an international level that involves the whole of the international community in dismantling the machinery of international terrorism, how it's financed, how these people move about the world, the countries that then harbour them and give them help. At every single level, we have to pursue and dismantle this machinery of terror. And that is important, not just for the purpose of bringing those people to account, but also in order to make sure that this does not happen again.
Britain has stood with the United States in most of its military campaigns of the last 10 years from the Gulf War on. Was it safe to say that if there is a military response, Britain will take part militarily?
Well, we've made it very clear that we stand side by side with the United States. And it's not a question of the United States simply saying, this is what we're going to do now, come and join us. The US is in close consultation with us and with other allies. And I think there will be a very broad support for a response that allows us to pursue and bring to account those responsible for this act and do it as an act of justice.
Do you think that the evidence is out yet? Have you been presented with what you need? You've talked about we need to know who did it, we need to see the evidence.
As President Bush said yesterday, it's fairly clear where the evidence is tending, but I think it is important that we consider the evidence in a very careful way, that it's factually based, that we are hard-headed about it. But once we have come to a conclusion, then it is important that we hold those people who are responsible for this, as I say, to account. And I think you will find, incidentally, that that is the view right round the world. I've spoken to Arab leaders in the past few days that have expressed their outrage at what has happened, their determination that this should be seen as something that the world of Islam is standing against, not merely countries like America and the United Kingdom. And I think you will find that there is enormous support for the idea that we must put together a broad-based coalition that hound these people down and that bring them to account and do it, as I say, for reasons of justice. We owe it to those people that lost their lives, to their families who are grieving, and to our own defence of democracy and liberty and freedom.
Which brings me to the question, you know, a lot of people are looking now at which country can be counted on, so-called, to stand with the United States and which country stand against. In the words of the U.S. President, you're either with us or you're not. We have heard, you know, in the past, we've seen how in some attempts to build coalitions, there are some countries who don't particularly, you know, go rushing into this kind of thing. France sometimes has its own reservations. Germany has its own reservations. Do you think there will be a cohesive Gulf War-style alliance?
I do think that the whole of the civilized world will stand together, yes. When I spoke to President Chirac, myself on the phone yesterday, and I can assure you, I think that the whole of Europe will stand with America on this. Because people know that what happened was not just aimed at America. It was aimed at all of us. I mean, these people believe they can achieve by mass terrorism what they cannot achieve by peaceful, democratic means. And therefore, even though it is in our nature to be reasonable, to proceed very cautiously and carefully, we haven't sought this conflict. When the conflict comes, then as we've learnt before from our history, we have to be prepared to face up to it. And I think that for a long period of time, the world has turned a blind eye, been somewhat indifferent to the menace of international terrorism. And I think we're all, to an extent, culpable in that. But what we've got to do now is to realise that it exists, look at its full power and potency, realise that these people, incidentally, if they could do worse, would do worse. The number of people they kill is not limited by anything other than purely technical capability. There's no morality so far as they're concerned. And once we understand that, then I think it is important that we not merely, as I say, pursue those people who have been directly responsible and hold them to account, but then look at the way that terrorism operates, how it's financed, where it is, and how we pursue it and dismantle it.
Today there are reports, for instance, that even in England there's a bank, at least one bank, maybe more, that has been used to channel funds for propaganda for this group. There has been some radical voices in the Islamic community here calling for martyrdom and, you know, standing against the United States in this matter. What does a democracy such as yours and other democracies, what can you do? Do you have to sort of encroach on perhaps some of the things that make a democratic world stand apart? Some of the civil liberties, some of the protections on individual freedom of speech, freedom to act, freedom to hide under the banner of religious organizations? I mean, will you crack down here?
We will certainly look, as I think most countries will, at our own domestic laws and see how, in a sense, they measure up to the scale of the problem we now face. And I think we can proceed in a sensible way, which is to say people are perfectly entitled to express their views. And if people want to be anti-British or anti-American, you know, we're Democrats. We believe that people have the right to express their views. But if they are engaged in organising terror or acts of terrorism, then we have got to act against that. And you're right, I think a lot of people will look at, for example, how terrorism is financed, how some of these people do shelter in our country, and not just our country, but other countries, democratic countries around the world. And if this evil of mass terrorism is as we say it is, then we have got to exercise the power and the vigilance to ensure that it's restrained and defeated. Now, I don't believe that that is to act in contradiction of our civil liberties. I believe it is in part pursuing the basic civil liberty that people have to go about their business free from terror.
Do you think there might be, I don't know, a system of identity cards or something similar to that?
Well, I think there are a whole series of things that people will look at in the wake of this. And I think this is the time, as it were, to set an objective and then to consider very carefully how we meet that objective.
Let's go back and talk about the alliance. How do you keep an alliance cohesive over what you've all described as a sustained, long and difficult campaign? It's going to take a long time, apparently, to do what you've described.
Well, of course, it's right in a sense that when we're merely offering words of support, that is, in a way, as I've been saying to people in the last few days, that's the easy part in one sense. I mean, the hard part starts when we actually take the action. But I think that support will be there, not just because of people's sense of horror and outrage at what has happened, but also because of their realization that unless we take action, then we are all at risk. And so it is right for reasons of justice, but it's also right for reasons of self-protection. Now, I'm not saying there won't be difficulties along the way, there always are in these situations. But certainly so far as Britain is concerned, and I really do believe the vast bulk of the civilized world will stand with America.
Have you spoken to your Russian counterpart? Have you spoken to President Putin?
Yes, I have spoken to President
And what
Putin.
are they prepared to do?
Well, I think obviously you have to talk to President Putin about the specific things that the Russians will do to help in this situation, but I don't think you should be in any doubt that President Putin and the Russian people were utterly horrified by this. And of course, they themselves have suffered terrorist outrages in Russia too.
When we talk about the military component of any response, do you think NATO has obviously unprecedentedly given its full support to come to mutual defense of one of its members? Do you envision a classic NATO-style response, or how would you envision a military response?
I think there's a process that we need to get clear here. First of all, we identify those responsible. Then we work out the correct military response, and then we see the right way of putting that together. Now, I think we're too premature at this stage to start speculating on the exact nature of either the response or the way that we will pursue it. But obviously, as I say, there will be these two components to the action that we take. The more immediate action, if you like, to bring to account those responsible, and then over time, the systematic war upon the whole machinery of terrorism.
Do you think that the United States would take unilateral action, or do you expect that there will be, you know, further consultations and sort of gathering of the coalition?
I think that the way that President Bush has handled this is absolutely right. I mean, he has been very calm and measured in the way that he has approached it. He has been in close consultation with allies. Obviously, America has got to defend itself against such an attack. And, you know, we will be there in support of America in doing that, and that is important. But it has been done in a way that I think reflects very great credit in the administration, because their determination is absolute, but their way of doing it, quite rightly, is to say, look, this is where we stand, this is why we stand in this position, and join us in it. And I think that that will, of itself, win a great deal of support. And as I say, not just amongst Western countries or countries that are traditional allies of the United States. I think they will get support for that position right across the world.
The President of the United States has talked about a fight between good and evil, and a lot has been made of a sort of a clash of civilizations, or a clash of fanatics against the civilized world. How do you see this clash, if there is one?
Well, I think those are two very separate things. The vast majority of Muslims are decent, law-abiding people, were absolutely appalled by this outrage, and will be fully supportive of us taking action against international terrorism. Indeed, many Muslims are victims of international terrorism. So in no sense should this be seen as, if you like, one part of the world against the Islamic world. It's not like that at all, and I think people understand that very, very clearly. But it is a war, if you like, between the civilized world and fanaticism. And whatever banner that fanaticism marches under, it is important that we recognize these are people who will stop at nothing. And therefore, however difficult it is for us, and however much we will regret the fact that we have to take this action because of the terrible thing that has happened, nonetheless, we have to do so. And this is a time for, you know, for cool head, for calm nerves, and for an absolute and fixed determination to see this thing through. And we will see it through. It will be done.
On that note, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, not just the European allies, as you heard Prime Minister Blair, but also many of the United States Arab allies, and even countries in unsuspected quarters such as Iran, both hardliners and reformers condemning the attack. Basically, to sum up, it appears that there are some countries who would agree with military action with the United States, but in general, all the countries that have been asked have given political support. Paula?
Christiane, I was very much struck by one question you asked the Prime Minister, and your exact question was, will Britain take part militarily? And the Prime Minister didn't directly answer that question. His response was the U.S. Will have very broad support. I respect the fact that he doesn't want to telegraph what Britain's actions will be to the rest of the world, but what is your understanding of what British military involvement could be?
Well, he was very clear that he did not want to telegraph that, obviously, and you're right. But just based on previous actions, essentially the British have, certainly in the last 10 years, in every action that the United States has taken, from the Gulf War to the periodic attacks on Iraq to Bosnia, Kosovo, and the other actions, have stood side by side with the United States militarily. It is expected that Britain will take part in some form or fashion.
Well, you covered a lot of territory in the interview. Was there anything in particular that caused you to think in a different way about what the Prime Minister had told you?
Not really in a different way. I thought there were several interesting things that he flagged. One, this was the first time he said that it was a state of war. Two, he said that the coalition would stand firm and would work to maintain cohesion throughout what he called a long and prolonged campaign. And he did sort of seem to say that the evidence is still not yet in fully, but we'll wait and see just what exactly that means, Paula.
Christiane, thank you so much for that strong interview. I have to quickly move to a special 3-hour edition of Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer. Among his guests this afternoon, Secretary